right, it's Terry here, and once again, I have got a special guest in the studio here for the Total Change Show. And from Langley, this is Kellie-Lynn Pirie. And thanks for coming over here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you're going to be speaking tonight over at Quinsam Hall.
That's correct.
At 6:30 p.m. That's up in Eagle Drive there, up in Campbell River, the Quinsam Hall, the Quinsam Band. And you're talking about your experience of transitioning the whole trans and gay, lesbian movement, all of the stuff that's so big today, so pertinent today, and what you personally went through. And I'm looking forward to hear what you got to say, because I really don't personally know. I know if we've got people I'm secondhand with,
right,
but don't really know anybody well that's going through this or been in it. But in every case I do know of, and there'll be about 3 or 4 of them right now, the folks have a lot of how can I put it? They're really broken up folks. A lot of injuries and emotional things when they're younger, and it seems to me that probably contributed to it, but I can't say for sure. I don't know. Really, this is an area that I can't talk a lot about, except that there's so much pain around it all right now. And but you've been through the whole thing. You've way back when went through transitioning from being a woman to become a man, and sort of the lesbian thing, and then the back and forth and all that. Why don't you tell a bit about your story, about what's happened, and I'll just maybe ask questions along the way if it seems pertinent.
Okay, so brief on my background. I was born in 1966, the youngest of my mom's 6 children. I was her baby girl. She made the poor parenting decision when I was very young to marry a pedophile. The man was a convicted pedophile. So I lived under his parentage until I was 13 years old. At that time, I turned him into the police.
So he abused you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well.
He eventually went to jail for sexually interfering with a minor in his care. That was the criminal offense he pled guilty to. He'd also introduced me to drugs and alcohol. So as a teenager, I sought alcohol to relieve the angst, relieve the confusion. There
used to be a lot of emotional pain, everything going on there with that.
Yeah, and my mom, when I was in my early teens, put me into a Christian school, but the school had found the Mennonites to be too liberal. So the pastor of the church had left the Mennonites because they were too liberal. So it was a very conservative Christian environment. So the messages I got about girls who were impure led me to think that I was evil.
Right.
And the messages I had gotten growing up, being raised by a pedophile, was that being female was dangerous. So I always knew I had been born a girl. Yeah. I just thought my life would have been so much better off if I had been born a boy.
Now, were you actually reasoning this out, or was this sort of an undercurrent in your emotions? How was that happening?
This is like what I've understood of how I felt as a child.
Yeah.
About the age of 8 or 9, I really developed the belief that I was fundamentally evil. Because I was also being told by these men that as a pretty blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl, I was causing them, I was tempting them beyond their ability to control their blah, blah, blah. And this is why they were doing the things to me that they did. So with those messages, I internalized a message that my being female is where the vulnerability came from. Right. And compiled to that, I saw these men choosing to protect their young sons from being exposed to other pedophiles. So they would not allow other pedophiles to abuse their sons, where they would allow other pedophiles to abuse their daughters.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is where this idea developed that had I been born a boy, I would have been safer.
Right.
And then, so cycle of addiction, same-sex relationships, sobriety, back into addiction. I just was in that cycle from my teens into my early 30s. So 2000.
So why same-sex relationships? Because didn't want to be connected like with a man. Is that what was happening there, or what?
Correct.
Yeah.
A deep fear of pregnancy.
All right.
When I was 12 years old, I thought I was pregnant. Of course, this is in 1978, 79, small town USA.
Yeah.
So there were no doctor's visits. There were no pregnancy tests.
Yeah, yeah.
The pedophile wasn't going to tell anyone in authority that he thought the 12-year-old was pregnant.
Well, so where did this lead eventually? So like through into your 20s. Mm-hmm. But where did the transitioning to be a man thing come
that
from?
came into my life in my 30s.
And how did that come in? What happened?
I got sober in 2002.
Yeah.
And then all of the anxiety, all of the discomfort with being a beautiful female, it was like the world had too many bright colors, noises, sounds, like there was all of these sharp edges to reality. And I started talking to the counselor, the one counselor. I was living in a women's support recovery house, about how uncomfortable it was for me being female.
Right.
And at the same time, I was exposed through what was called gay AA, because that's what I was attending at the time, to these men who were supposedly living as women. And it was this idea that if you feel this way, if you feel uncomfortable with who you are as a woman, then it's really because I'm a man. Mm-hmm. And this idea of an instant fix, especially as time went on and the therapy is just an ongoing process. And it's, once I heard this idea that I could put on this facade and all of these uncomfortable things about being female would just go away, mm-hmm. I became obsessed with that idea.
Right.
And at the leading edge of the affirmation process, they were no longer really doing a deep assessment as far as what's going on.
Didn't they? There was a much deeper assessment.
Yeah. Like even in the 90s, roughly 80% of the people who went to what was called a sex reassignment clinic would have been refused services.
Right. Because you've got some other issue that's
because
really
they were seen as having other issues. Yeah. Like in the 1970s, John Hopkins down in the United States, they had a sex reassignment clinic there.
Yeah.
And when they did their case study to see, so they had the men who were approved for the surgeries and the wrong sex hormones, and they had the men who weren't approved.
Yeah.
And they were doing just a first level case study looking at what were the outcomes.
Yeah, yeah.
They found that those who were refused services 5-10 years down the road were stable.
Right.
They were employed, they were doing well, because they had been told, no, you can't transition. This is never going to be a possibility. We'll help you we'll do everything we can to help you become comfortable with being a male in this society.
Yeah, yeah.
So we call that today reality affirming care.
Yeah.
So those who received reality affirming care, long term, so this was about a 10-year follow-up, were doing very well. They were employed, they were in stable relationships, they had stable housing.
Yeah, yeah.
If they had been in addictions, they had found their way out of addictions. Whereas the 20% that were approved for surgery, so these were the ones that were approved for surgery were the ones who had long-term relationships, they had long-term employment, they owned homes, they owned cars, they had all of these social determinants of success. If they received the surgery and they received the hormones, 10 years down the road, they were doing terrible.
Right. And this is a study from John Hopkins
This was
University.
John Hopkins, 1970,
Wow.
just space level. They never did the longitudinal.
yeah,
They shut down John Hopkins when these results came out.
Yeah, wow.
And now the trans lobby has made John Hopkins formally apologize, saying, "Oh no, we were just being transphobic. That's why we shut it down." But so what's called the World Professional Association of Trans Health Providers has known for decades
What those studies said.
what the study said, and every quality research study has said the same thing.
Right.
Doing these surgeries, giving people the wrong sex hormones, long term doesn't help.
Right.
What's called the Swedish study, which followed people for up to 30 years, showed a 19 times higher suicide rate long term with people who got the surgeries and the hormones.
So because of the time here, what happened to you? What would you do?
So 2004 is when I entered the trans delusion, so I started talking about it. I got affirmed into it by my addictions counselor. I did I started what's called living as a man.
Yeah.
So I started wearing men's clothing. I put on a fake mustache, put on a fake beard, that point in time. Changed my name. I was a year into the process when I started taking testosterone. 2006, I had a hysterectomy. 2008, I had a bilateral mastectomy. 2009, I began wondering what am I doing? Because the way I'm feeling inside really hasn't changed. I still feel the anxiety. I still feel the discomfort. I still have all of these moments where I just don't feel comfortable in my own skin.
So that the outward changes and even the social changes, because you're now, it's different relationships.
Yeah.
Didn't deal with what you were feeling inside.
It didn't fix the God-sized hole in my heart.
Yeah.
So I fled Vancouver. I went to long-haul trucking.
Yeah.
And there I went into flat decking.
Yeah.
So it was a very male-dominated profession.
Right.
So I really learned about the things that motivate men. And the more I got to know these men, the more I realized that I'm not a man.
Yeah.
The things that motivate me to do the things I do are so much different.
Right.
And into that period of my life, my Christian family, especially my oldest brothers, would ask me, will you pray with me? Will you come to church with me when I was visiting family? So God just really began to slowly invite me back, like call me back. And I asked him a lot in these past 2 years, like, what was different this time? Because this time around in sobriety, May 2002.
Did you start to drink again and stuff?
No, why haven't I returned to drugs and alcohol? It's been over 20 years. Why didn't I go back?
Right.
And he's like, this time, if somebody asked me if I was a Christian, I would say, Jesus and I are okay. But I don't think his people would ever want anything to do with me.
Yeah.
And God was like, because before, if somebody asked me if I was a Christian, I would say no.
Right.
So he was like, that was enough of an acknowledgement of me in your life. Like, you turned to me.
Yeah.
And as you turned to me, I continued to call you.
Wow. So what happened with the process of detransitioning? And I mean, that is so attacked now.
Yes.
In our culture, it's crazy. Like, we even got a law in Canada that you can't counsel anyone that way. And,
I get my counseling in the United States.
Yeah.
So
what did you do?
Detransitioning specific counseling I get is international. I sat for a lot of years in regret, thinking there was no way back.
Right.
And as I got off of the highway, 2022, 2021, 2022, the brother just older than me started inviting me to Bible studies, started inviting me to his church. And at that time, I still looked male. I still had a beard. I'm bald. These people who invited me into their home for Bible study were willing to call me Kellie-Lynn. They were willing to call me she. They were
So there was
willing to
love
call
now.
me her. There was truth.
Yeah.
They started speaking God's truth into my life.
Oh, wow.
And when I look at how much the trans queers
Yeah.
are like, oh, that's dead naming, oh, that's transphobia. Truth. They resist anyone who's speaking truth back into the life of someone who has been fractured from their understanding of being male or female.
Right, right.
Because we know that the truth will set us free.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what does the truth set you free from? It sets you free from the deception.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't think there was any way back to looking female from where I had gone. Because
Well, you look to me. You're a woman sitting here with us in the studio. In the studio.
yeah, and it melts my brain sometimes because December 15th, 2023
Yeah.
is when I was like, okay, because God asked me, like, do you want to get married? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, then you know what you have to do. But what he was saying was, will you come back to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Will you come back to me? So I went home that night. I'm not going to say I was obedient right away. I was living off grid. I waited until the dark. And I dug up an old razor I had and I shaved off the beard.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, Lord, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know anything. Like at that time, I didn't even know how I was going to find a doctor to start estrogen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I took that step of obedience. And when I looked at the shave job the next day, it was like ugly.
Yeah.
And I bought a new razor and I've been shaving almost daily since then. And it was several days after that the person who's now my family doctor,
Yeah.
I had met him at a event, so he knew I was a detransitioner. And he said a mutual friend of ours has indicated that you don't know what it's going to look like, but you're wanting to return to walking in God's truth regarding your sex. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, I'm phoning just to let you know if you're looking for a family doctor, I'll do that for you. So that day he prescribed me estrogen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So how the physical transition? Like, did you go through a lot of wild ride? Just the hormone changes?
it is all of the emotional dysregulation of early sobriety.
Yeah.
Because hormones are powerful chemicals.
Oh, yeah. They're wow.
And they regulate how we experience our emotions.
Yeah. They don't just regulate your sexual part. That's everything.
No.
Everything runs on
They,
them. You know?
they regulate your entire emotional landscape. So I describe it to people as I went from being on like a ocean wave to a stormy sea.
Yeah. For how long?
It's still there.
Oh, is it really?
There's days it's still there. I started off at about half of a estrogen replacement dose.
Yeah.
I had concerns about the emotional dysregulation of the experience, and also I was thinking about the cancer risk associated.
Mm-hmm.
And attending the Beyond Transition support group that I go to, the other women who'd had a hysterectomy were saying to me, well, you've had the bilateral mastectomy. You've had the hysterectomy. You've had your ovaries removed. You don't have a cervix anymore. You don't have the concerns for cancer.
Oh,
so take the full hormone dose, and it'll be uncomfortable at first, but you'll find that you will reach a level of emotional stability that'll be better than where you're at now.
Wow. Yeah.
And so my world's very wet again, is what I say.
Let's quickly get to you started D-Trans Alliance Canada.
Yes.
Okay, and because we're really out of time here, but just tell us a little bit about that.
It's a outreach to individuals. There's not a lot in Canada for people who are detransitioning.
Yeah.
And we keep getting told it's extremely rare, it's extremely rare, it's extremely rare. It's extremely more common than people want to talk about. Detransitioners are so isolated that they don't... WPATH doesn't want people to know how common regret is. They don't want people... So D-Trans Alliance Canada is a social networking that exists to tell other people who are detransitioning, you're not alone. And also we're beginning to connect and coordinate. One of the things we're coordinating is sex recognition. So what's going on is at the provincial levels, they are beginning to conflate what's called sex and gender on our documentation.
Right.
So what we're advocating for is that if the provincial government is it feels it needs to track gender on provincial ID, that it appropriately track gender separately from sex.
Right.
Because sex matters. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'll give you the brief. So during the 10 years I was a long-haul trucker, I would have urinary tract infections.
Yeah.
How those are treated for a woman is different than how those are treated for a man.
So there's a medical reason
regarding the length of time that you're on antibiotics and the type of antibiotics. It's just the strength of it. And the other thing is I had a complication from my hysterectomy. I had an abscess formation in my abdominal cavity, which ended up perianal. So when I went to the emergency room, it was the difference between the doctor saying, Mr. Anderson, you have an enlarged prostate, go home, see your doctor, and my having emergency surgery within an hour of arriving at the emergency room.
Right.
So it matters on provincial documentation that sex and gender identity be tracked separately. Medical professionals need to know this information because it's medically pertinent. In the United States, young women have almost died as a result of the doctors thinking they were dealing with a male because that's what all the ID showed. And then when they realized that the unconscious person they're dealing with is a female, having a female-specific medical problem.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're having they're going to have that meeting tonight up at the Quinsam Hall at Friday. Well, this is Friday, May 2nd. So if you're not hearing it May 2nd, then it's over. But Friday, May 2nd, 6:30 p.m. up at the Quinsam Hall. That's up in the Quinsam Band Reserve Hall there, 2005 Eagle Drive, Campbell River. Anyway, Kelly, thank you for sharing on the program. Is there anything you would say to someone right now who's just going through the emotional upheaval of this? And how about for those that have someone they love going through this? Maybe that's more important to say. What would you say to someone whose son or daughter is going through this right now, and from a Christian perspective?
You are not alone.
Yeah.
God's truth is the most powerful tool you have. And the detransitioners to all talk about the same thing when you finally get to a place of recognizing that entering into the trans delusion has not helped. They return to those who spoke truth into their life.
Yeah.
So as difficult as it is, as frustrating as it is, as much pushback as there is, stand firm on God's truth.
And just love Him.
And just love Him. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much for coming on here. And hopefully folks that want to follow up will be able to get up to the meeting.
Yeah, that would be beautiful.
Yeah. And we pray for those people listening right now that the wisdom and mind and strengthening of the Lord, the healing of God, be with you and your family and those that are going through these things. In Jesus' name.
Amen.